Part 1. 98 Africans arrived at Annapolis Harbor on September 29, 1767 aboard the Lord Ligonier. 42 had perished during the crossing. Among the survivors was a 17-year-old Mandinka warrior who would spend the next 55 years refusing to forget his name. The records from Spotsylvania County, Virginia, show a slave purchase that October, given the name Toby. But what those records don't show, what plantation ledgers deliberately omitted, and what family Bibles refused to acknowledge, was the systematic campaign to erase not just a man's identity, but the living memory of an entire culture. This is the story of how one African transformed the brutality meant to break him into a legacy that would outlast his captors. What you're about to hear has been obscured by 2 centuries of silence, and the truth is far more disturbing than anything you've been told. Before we continue with the story of the man who became known as Toby, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories like this. And we'd love to leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from right now. The details of what happened next come from sources that took nearly 200 years to surface. The Gambia River cut through West Africa like a wound that never healed, carrying British ships deeper into the continent than any other waterway on that coast. By 1767, the trading outpost on James Island had processed tens of thousands of captured Africans, but the demand from Virginia tobacco plantations had reached unprecedented levels. The wars between local kingdoms created opportunities for slave raiders, and the British Royal Africa Company paid premium prices for young men with warrior training. In the village of Juffure, 2 miles from the British fort, the Kinte clan maintained their reputation as blacksmiths and holy men despite the constant threat of raids. Part 2. The Mandinka people had endured for centuries by mastering the art of appearing cooperative while maintaining their traditions in secret. They taught their children to be cautious near the river, to never venture alone into the forest, and to run at the first sight of the African slave traders who worked for European buyers. Kinte understood these dangers better than most. As a blacksmith, he'd seen the iron shackles that bound captives for transport. He'd heard the stories of villages emptied overnight, of families torn apart and sold to different ships. He taught his eldest son the traditional skills of drum making, not just as cultural preservation, but as practical knowledge. A young man who could craft instruments might be kept alive aboard a slave ship to maintain morale among the captives. The boy's name carried weight in Mandinka tradition. Count meant complete or whole, a name given to firstborn sons who were expected to carry on the family's legacy. At 17, he'd completed his manhood training, learned to hunt with a spear, and could recite his family's lineage back 7 generations. The village elders spoke of him as someone who would one day become a respected elder himself. On a morning in early July 1767, Kunta ventured into the forest near Juffure to gather wood for drum making. The specific type of hardwood he needed grew 3 mi from the village, far enough to be dangerous, but close enough that many young men made the journey regularly. He carried no weapon. Mandinka warriors didn't hunt on sacred gathering grounds, and he moved with the confidence of someone who knew these paths since childhood. What Kunta didn't know was that British Colonel O'Hare's forces had arrived at James Island 3 days earlier, bringing orders for a large shipment of slaves to fill Virginia's labor shortage. Part 3. The conditions were deliberately brutal. Minimal food and water, exposure to the sun during the day and cold at night, and the constant presence of guards who beat anyone who made excessive noise. The psychological impact was as calculated as the physical abuse. These men wanted captives who understood that resistance meant suffering, that cooperation was the only path to survival. When the Lord Ligonier's crew came to collect their cargo, they brought a British ship's surgeon named Dr. Thompson. His job was to inspect each captive for disease, injury, or defects that might reduce their value. The examination was methodical and dehumanizing, checking teeth, feeling muscles, examining bodies with the same attention a farmer might give to livestock. Of the 32 captives presented, he rejected 7 as unsuitable. Kunta passed the inspection. At 17 years old, he was exactly what Virginia tobacco plantations needed. Young, strong, and trained in physical labor from years of blacksmith work. The British paid the slates in rum, textiles, and iron bars, standard currency for the slave trade. Kunta became property of Captain Thomas Davies, recorded in the ship's manifest, simply as male, approximately 17 years Mandinka origin. The journey from shore to ship happened in small boats that carried 10 captives at a time. British sailors handled this transfer with practiced efficiency, knowing that this moment, when captives first saw the massive ship that would carry them across the ocean, often triggered desperate escape attempts. They kept everyone shackled and moved quickly. Kunta's first sight of the Lord Ligonier revealed the scale of what was happening. This wasn't a raid on a single village. This was an industrial operation that had been refined over decades of practice. The ship was designed specifically for human cargo, with multiple decks modified to hold as many bodies as possible in the smallest space. Other captives were already. Part 4. Aboard, their faces visible through the cargo hold small openings. The British crew herded the new captives below deck, where they encountered conditions that defied human comprehension. The slave deck measured approximately 5 feet high, forcing everyone to crouch or lie down. The space allocated for each person was roughly 16 in wide and 6 feet long. Barely enough room to lie flat. The heat was suffocating, the air thick with sweat and fear. Wooden platforms divided the space into 2 levels, effectively doubling the number of captives that could be packed into each section. The crew chained captives together in pairs, right ankle to left ankle, making independent movement impossible. Additional chains ran along the walls, attaching to the ankle shackles and preventing anyone from reaching the stairs. The psychological impact of these restraints went beyond physical imprisonment. They made it clear that individual survival depended on the cooperation of whoever you were chained to. Kunta found himself shackled to a man named Fonta, captured from a village 50 miles inland. Neither spoke the other's dialect fluently, but they shared enough common Mandinka roots to communicate basic needs. Fonta had been imprisoned for 2 weeks and understood the ship's routines. When food came, how to position your body to avoid the worst cramps, which British sailors were most likely to inflict random beatings. The Lord Ligonier remained at anchor for another week, while Captain Davies negotiated with coastal traders for additional captives. During this time, conditions below deck deteriorated rapidly. The British provided food once per day, a mixture of beans, yams, and occasionally fish served in communal buckets that 10 people shared. Water came twice daily in small rations that left everyone in a state of chronic thirst. The waste buckets quickly overflowed, and the crew's response was to hose down the deck once every 3 days, treating the captives like livestock.